My name is Jack Stevens, and my life was about as normal as you'd expect for a man in his 40s. I was happily married, or so I thought, until one day everything came crashing down. What started as an ordinary morning quickly spiraled into a nightmare that ripped apart my family and made me question the very foundation of trust and love. I'm a 40-year-old man, married to Emily, also 40, for the past 5 years. Our marriage wasn't without its challenges. Blending families never is, but we made it work. Emily has 2 kids from her previous marriage, a son, Tyler, who's 14, and her daughter, Madison, 11. I also have my own daughter, Sophia, who's 10, from my previous marriage. Our home was chaotic at times, but I thought we were doing okay. Until the day Madison accused me of something I never expected, something vile and disgusting. She claimed that I touched her inappropriately. Not just a casual or accidental touch. No, Madison said I had touched her private parts. The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like my entire world collapsed in an instant. I would never do that. I told Emily, my voice cracking with the weight of the accusation. But the look in her eyes, told me everything. She believed her daughter without question. I watched the fear and anger consume her as she stared at me like I was a monster. The worst part? No matter how many times I denied it, no matter how much I pleaded, she didn't believe me. To Emily, I had already crossed an unforgivable line. Her mind was made up the moment Madison uttered those words. I felt sick to my stomach. How could my own wife, the woman I've shared my life with for 5 years, think I was capable of something so horrific? I needed to get out of that house, to clear my head. So, I left. I went for a walk, not really knowing where I was headed. Eventually, I found myself at my best friend Mike's place. When I told him what had happened, he looked at me with a mixture of shock and sympathy. "Jack, man, this is bad," he said. "You're in deep trouble. No one's going to believe you over an 11-year-old girl, especially in a situation like this. You could lose everything, Sophia included." The words sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, the full weight of the situation hit me. It wasn't just about Emily and her kids anymore. If this escalated, I could lose my daughter, my job, my entire future. I had to protect myself, and most importantly, I had to protect Sophia. After a sleepless night filled with thoughts of worst-case scenarios, I made my decision. The next morning, I went back to the house. I told Emily that we needed to talk. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make her see reason. "I never touched Madison," I said, my voice as firm as I could manage. "I don't know why she's saying this, but I'm done trying to figure it out. I don't feel safe here anymore. I have to protect myself and Sophia." Emily's face fell. I could see the battle playing out in her mind. The instinct to protect her daughter at all costs, and the small part of her that wanted to believe me. But her protective mama bear instinct was too strong, and I knew there was no convincing her otherwise. I packed my bags. I packed Sophia's bags, and we left. From that moment on, I refused to take any calls from Emily. I told her we'd only communicate through text messages. It wasn't out of anger, it was out of necessity. In our state, it's illegal to record conversations without the other person's consent, and I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. For the next 3 weeks, Emily sent me countless messages. Some were angry, accusing me of abandoning her and the kids. Others were filled with guilt and apologies, blaming herself for not seeing the truth. But through it all, I remained firm. I couldn't go back to a house where I wasn't trusted, where I was seen as the enemy. Then, 3 weeks later, the message came that flipped everything upside down. Emily admitted that she now believed me. After I left, she started questioning Madison's story. She noticed inconsistencies in her daughter's accusations. Eventually, it became clear Madison had lied. I should have felt relief. I should have been happy. But instead, I felt empty. I couldn't go back. The damage was already done. How could I ever trust Emily again, after she had believed the worst of me so easily? And Madison? I couldn't imagine living under the same roof as her, knowing that she was capable of such a lie. Emily begged me to reconsider. She promised that Madison would never be a problem again, that she'd take whatever steps were necessary to make things right. She even asked me if I wanted her to give up custody of her kids just to keep our marriage together. I paused, stunned. I never wanted to be the reason someone gave up their children, but the thought of living in that house again made my skin crawl. I told Emily the truth. I can't live with them. I can't trust them. I don't know what else to say. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily didn't respond right away. I could feel her heart break through the phone. She was desperate, but what could I do? I had to protect myself and Sophia. And then, out of nowhere, Emily told me she was seriously considering giving up custody of Madison and Tyler. She was willing to go that far just to save our marriage. But things were far from over. The next day, I got a call from Emily's ex-husband, Rob. He was furious, demanding to know why Emily was suddenly talking about giving up their kids. When I told him the truth about Madison's lie, his anger shifted. He was mad at Madison, but even more so at Emily for believing the lie and letting it get this far. "I'll handle it," Rob said, his voice tight with anger. But I knew this was only the beginning. I was in the middle of a storm, and I wasn't backing down. I had no choice. The calls from friends and family began pouring in. They blamed me for making Emily choose between me and her kids. But what was I supposed to do? Am I wrong for protecting myself? Am I the villain in this story for refusing to go back to a house where I've been betrayed? Just when I thought the nightmare couldn't get any worse, Emily dropped another bombshell that sent my mind reeling. The day after I told her I wanted a divorce, she called me with news that shook me to my core. She was pregnant. I stood there, phone in hand, unable to process what I had just heard. Was she lying again? Was this just another desperate attempt to keep me from walking away? The timing was too convenient. I wanted to believe her, but after everything that had happened, trust wasn't something I could afford anymore. "Jack, I swear," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." I needed proof. I asked if I could go with her to the doctor to confirm it. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. A few days later, we were sitting in the doctor's office, the silence between us thicker than ever. The doctor confirmed what Emily had told me. She was 12 weeks pregnant. As I sat there listening to the doctor, I felt like I was suffocating. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were about to get divorced and now a baby? How was this even real? When we got back to the car, Emily turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to do this alone, Jack," she whispered. "Please, I know I've made mistakes, but I can't go through this pregnancy without you." My heart ached for her, but I couldn't ignore the truth of our situation. The trust between us had been shattered, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. Even the news of her pregnancy didn't change that. "We'll figure out how to co-parent," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be there for the baby, but I can't go back to living in that house, Emily. I can't risk my future on promises after everything that's happened." She looked at me with a mixture of sadness and desperation. "I'll make sure Madison behaves. You won't have to worry about her anymore. I'll take care of everything. Just don't leave me." I shook my head, my emotions in turmoil. "It's not about Madison anymore," I told her. "It's about trust. You believed her over me without a second thought, Emily. I'm not blaming you for protecting your child. I would have done the same for Sophia, but that doesn't change the fact that you didn't trust me. And now, I can't trust you." Her sobs filled the car, but I couldn't give her the comfort she needed. I had to stay strong, for my own sake and for Sophia's. My priority was protecting my daughter, and I wasn't about to risk everything again. Days passed, and the distance between us only grew. Emily's messages became more frantic. She was terrified of going through the pregnancy alone, but I was firm in my decision. I couldn't go back. The house that once felt like home now felt like a trap. Meanwhile, the fallout with her kids was even worse than I had imagined. Madison's lie had not only destroyed our marriage, but it had also blown up Emily's relationship with her. Madison had moved in with her father, Rob, and now Emily was refusing to speak to her own daughter. As much as I wanted to feel anger toward Madison, I couldn't. She was just a kid. She had made a terrible mistake, and now everyone was paying the price for it. Rob, Emily's ex-husband, called me one night. I could tell from the second he answered that he was on edge. "Jack, you need to know that Madison's not doing well," he said. "She's been distant, avoiding us all. Emily won't talk to her, and now I don't know how to help her. I could hear the frustration in his voice, but I was just as lost. What could I say? I wasn't her father. And after what she did, I couldn't even bring myself to think about how to mend that relationship. Rob sighed deeply, his voice full of regret. Look, I know you didn't do what she said you did. I confronted Madison, and she broke down. She admitted it was a lie. She's a kid who's afraid of losing her mom to someone else. I get it, but now I'm stuck in the middle of this mess. Emily's ignoring her, and Madison's ghosting everyone. His words cut deep. The situation had spiraled so far out of control that no one knew how to fix it. I wish I knew what to say, Rob, I admitted. But I'm just trying to keep my own life together right now. Rob didn't argue. He understood the storm we were all caught in. I don't blame you, Jack. You did what you had to do for you and Sophia. But it's a mess. I couldn't have said it better myself. It was a mess. A mess that no one knew how to clean up. The calls and texts from Emily continued, as did the guilt trips from friends and family. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't just forgive and forget, why I wouldn't go back to Emily now that she was pregnant. But they didn't live through what I had. They didn't know what it was like to be accused of something so horrific, to have your wife believe you were capable of hurting her child in the most intimate way possible. Emily begged me to reconsider. What if we go to counseling? What if we take things slow? I'll do anything, Jack. I can't go through this pregnancy by myself. The pain in her voice was palpable, but so was mine. I told her that no amount of counseling could fix what had been broken between us. We could co-parent. I would be there for the baby, but we weren't going to be together anymore. The trust was gone. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your kids, I told her. But I can't live in a house with Madison after what she did. I can't. That's when she dropped the last bombshell. What if I give up custody? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I froze. Was she serious? Could she really be willing to give up her own children just to stay with me? The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. No mother should ever have to make that kind of choice. I didn't want her to do it. I didn't expect her to. But the fact that she even considered it told me everything I needed to know. Emily was desperate, and desperation was driving her to places she never should have gone. I knew, in that moment, that there was no going back. This was the end of our marriage. The more Emily pushed, the more I felt the weight of the world bearing down on me. It wasn't just the texts or the calls. She was talking to mutual friends, my family, and anyone who would listen, trying to get them to convince me to come back. She painted a picture of herself as the victim, abandoned by her husband while pregnant and left to handle everything alone. I was painted as the villain in her story, the cold-hearted man who wouldn't forgive her mistake. But they didn't know the whole truth, did they? They didn't know how much I had sacrificed to make our blended family work, how much I had tried to build trust between myself and her kids. And they definitely didn't know what it felt like to be accused of something so disgusting and vile that it made me question my entire life. To everyone else, it was just a misunderstanding, a mistake that could be forgiven and forgotten. But they weren't in my shoes. They didn't have to live with the knowledge that, for weeks, my wife believed I was capable of violating her daughter. No one seemed to understand that once trust is broken that way, it's nearly impossible to get it back. The breaking point came when Emily's sister, Karen, called me one night. Her voice was stern, and I could tell she had been drinking. "Jack, you've got to stop this," she said. Her words slurred but pointed. "You're ruining Emily's life. You're ruining your family. For what? A lie that a little girl told? You're really going to throw away your marriage over this?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice steady. "Karen, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand," she snapped. "Emily is pregnant. She's terrified, Jack. She's going through this alone because you can't forgive her for believing her own daughter. You think you're the only one hurting here? You think this is easy for her?" "I know it's not easy," I replied, my voice strained. "But it's not that simple. This isn't just about forgiveness. It's about trust. She didn't trust me when it mattered most." Karen sighed heavily, clearly frustrated. "You're making a mistake, Jack. A big one. One you're going to regret for the rest of your life." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling with frustration. Everyone around me was pushing me to go back, to forgive and forget. But none of them had been in that house. None of them had felt the weight of that accusation or seen the look in Emily's eyes when she believed I was capable of such a thing. I was on the verge of breaking. The pressure was mounting, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations. But I had to stay strong. For me, for Sophia, and now, for the unborn child who would soon be a part of this mess. As if things couldn't get worse, Emily threw another curveball into the mix. One morning, I received an email from her lawyer. She was filing for full custody of our unborn child, citing emotional instability on my part. The email made my blood run cold. Emily was preparing for a legal battle that could destroy any chance I had of being a father to my own child. The message was clear. If I didn't come back to her, she was going to make sure I never saw our child. I immediately contacted my lawyer, explaining the situation. The legal battle was about to begin, and I knew this would get ugly. Emily was desperate, and desperate people did desperate things. The fact that she was willing to use the baby as leverage only solidified my belief that I had made the right decision in leaving. I couldn't trust her, not with my future, and certainly not with our child's well-being. I had to prepare for the fight of my life. It was during one of the last conversations I had with Emily that I truly realized how far we had fallen. I agreed to meet her in person, in a neutral location, to discuss how we were going to move forward. We sat across from each other at a small cafe, the tension between us palpable. Emily looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes sunken. She hadn't slept much, that was clear. I felt a pang of guilt in my chest, knowing that she was going through the pregnancy under such enormous stress. But I had to remind myself that this was her choice. She had chosen this path. "I don't want to fight you, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to take the baby away from you, but you left me no choice. You won't come back. You won't try to fix this." I rubbed my temples, the frustration mounting. "I can't go back, Emily. I've told you this 100 times. The trust is gone. I don't feel safe in that house, and I don't trust Madison. I can't live with her." "I know she lied," Emily admitted, tears filling her eyes. "I know she was wrong, but she's my daughter, Jack. What do you expect me to do? Throw her away? Abandon her?" I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "I'm not asking you to abandon her, but I can't be a part of that family anymore. Not after what happened." Emily's hands trembled as she wiped away her tears. "I don't know how to do this without you," she whispered. "I can't raise this baby alone, Jack." The pain in her voice was unbearable, but I couldn't let it sway me. I had to stay strong. "We'll figure out a way to co-parent," I told her. "I'll be there for the baby, I promise. But I can't come back. I just can't." The silence between us was suffocating. We both knew that this was the end. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. The woman I had once loved more than anything in the world was now a stranger, and the life we had built together was in ruins. After our conversation, things moved quickly. Emily followed through with her legal threats, filing for full custody of the baby before it was even born. I responded with my own legal actions, determined to fight for my rights as a father. The legal battle was brutal, with both of us slinging accusations at each other through lawyers, all while Emily's pregnancy progressed. Meanwhile, her relationship with Madison deteriorated even further. Madison barely spoke to her mother, and when she did, it was filled with anger and resentment. Emily tried to reach out to her, but the damage had already been done. Madison had driven a wedge between us, and now she was doing the same with her own mother. Rob, Emily's ex-husband, tried to help, but he was just as lost as the rest of us. His daughter had lied, and now their family was falling apart too. He confided in me that he didn't know how to get through to her, how to fix what she had broken. It seemed like every part of my life was crumbling around me. The legal battle, the broken relationships, the constant pressure from family and friends. It was all too much. But through it all, I kept reminding myself of one thing. I had to protect Sophia and the baby. I couldn't let the chaos consume me. I had to stay strong for them. The legal battle began to consume every aspect of my life. The emails from lawyers, the court filings, the endless discussions of what would happen to the baby after it was born. It all became a twisted game of strategy. Emily wanted full custody, and her argument was that I had abandoned her during her pregnancy. She painted me as a man who left his wife and children in their most vulnerable time. In her eyes, I was the one who destroyed the family, not her. Not Madison with her lies, not the broken trust. I was the villain in Emily's story, but I wasn't going to roll over and let her take my child away from me. The baby wasn't even born yet, but I was already fighting for my right to be a part of its life. I was doing this for the baby and for Sophia, who needed to know that her father wouldn't back down in the face of adversity. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Claire, sat me down in her office one afternoon and told me bluntly, "This is going to get ugly, Jack. Emily's lawyer is going to come after you with everything they've got. They're going to paint you as an unfit father who abandoned his family." I nodded, already expecting the worst. "I'm prepared for that, but we can fight it, right?" Claire leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We can, but we need more than just your word. The court will look at everything, your financial stability, your mental health, your living situation. If Emily makes this about emotional instability, we're going to have to prove that you're the better parent." I knew what she meant. This wasn't just about winning the custody of the baby. It was about proving that I wasn't the man Emily was trying to make me out to be. I had to be perfect in the eyes of the court, and that meant controlling my emotions, keeping my life together, and fighting for every scrap of evidence that showed I could provide a better home for the baby. As we prepared for court, I found myself battling on two fronts: the legal war with Emily and the emotional war inside my own head. Every day felt like I was walking through a minefield, knowing that one wrong step could blow everything up. Amidst all the chaos, I couldn't help but worry about Sophia. She had been my rock through all of this, staying strong and adjusting to our new life in the apartment. But there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when I could see the cracks starting to form in her brave exterior. One evening, while I was making dinner, she sat at the table, staring blankly at the homework in front of her. She hadn't said much that day, and I knew something was wrong. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart pounded in my chest, fearing the answer. Sophia didn't look up. She just shrugged, her pencil tapping rhythmically against the table. I put down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and sat down next to her. "Talk to me, kiddo. What's going on?" For a moment, I thought she wouldn't say anything, but then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is the baby going to live with us? Or with Emily?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized she had been thinking about it, that the custody battle was weighing on her as much as it was on me. "I don't know yet," I admitted, my voice soft. "We're still figuring that out." Sophia nodded slowly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I don't want you to leave me, Dad." Her words broke something inside me. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight, whispering, "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. No matter what happens with the baby, I'll always be here for you. I promise." She didn't cry, but I could feel her small body trembling as she clung to me. That's when I realized just how much this whole situation had been affecting her. In trying to protect her from the chaos, I hadn't noticed how deeply it had seeped into her life. I had to stay strong for her. No matter how ugly the custody battle got, no matter how many accusations Emily threw my way, I couldn't let Sophia get lost in the middle of it all. As the court date drew closer, Emily's messages became more erratic, more desperate. She was spiraling, and it was clear that the stress of the pregnancy, combined with the divorce and the custody fight, was pushing her to the edge. "Jack, I need you," one of her texts read late one night. "I can't do this alone. Please, just come back, and we can fix everything." Another time, she sent me a message that chilled me to the bone. "I'm not okay, Jack. I don't know how much more of this I can take. You've already won. Please stop." I showed these messages to Claire, who immediately advised me to document everything. "She's unstable right now," Claire warned. "She's going to try to use this against you, but at the same time, her instability might work in your favor when it comes to custody." It was a cruel thought, using Emily's emotional state to win the battle over the baby, but I knew it was the only way I could ensure I wouldn't be cut out of my child's life. Emily's desperation was leading her down a dangerous path, and I had to protect myself and the baby from whatever chaos she might bring. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Rob, Emily's ex-husband, stepped in. He called me out of the blue, sounding tense and agitated. "We need to talk, Jack," he said, his voice clipped. "What's going on?" I asked, already bracing for more bad news. "It's about Madison," he said. "She's been acting out, and now she's refusing to even talk to her mother. Emily's been a wreck, and I don't know what to do with her anymore." I wasn't surprised that Madison's behavior had deteriorated further. After everything that had happened, it wasn't shocking that she'd lash out. But what caught me off guard was what Rob said next. "I need you to talk to Emily," Rob continued. "She's not handling this well. Madison's lying again. She's telling people Emily doesn't love her and that you left because of her. It's a mess, Jack. If she keeps this up, it's going to hurt your case in court. You need to step in and stop this before it gets worse." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. Rob wanted me to fix Emily's relationship with her daughter, the same daughter who had accused me of doing something unspeakable, the same daughter who had nearly destroyed my life. "I don't know what you expect me to do, Rob," I replied. "I'm not her father." "That's your job." He sighed heavily, the weight of the situation clearly getting to him. "I know, but Madison listens to you. She's scared, Jack. She thinks she's going to lose her mom. And if she keeps spreading lies, it's only going to make things worse for all of us." I didn't want to get involved. Every fiber of my being screamed that I should stay out of it, but I knew Rob was right. If Madison's lies continued to spread, they could seriously damage my chances of winning custody. And as much as I hated the idea of stepping back into that mess, I couldn't risk losing the baby. "I'll talk to Emily," I finally agreed, my stomach turning at the thought of it. But deep down, I knew that no matter what I said, this situation was only going to get messy. The mess kept growing, just like Rob had predicted. Every day seemed to bring a new level of chaos, and Emily's desperation was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Her messages were relentless, pleading one moment, threatening the next. It was like she didn't know how to control her emotions anymore, as if the pregnancy and everything else were crushing her under the weight. But it wasn't just Emily. Madison's behavior had taken an alarming turn. Rob called again one afternoon, his voice tense with concern. "Jack, she's been skipping school. She's acting out in ways I've never seen before. We're at a loss here. Emily's emotional breakdown has her spiraling." It was hard to feel sympathy after everything Madison had put me through, but I couldn't ignore the situation. Rob wasn't just trying to fix Madison. He was desperate to stop her from becoming a wild card in the custody battle. If her lies kept surfacing, it could damage Emily's case and, by extension, my chances of getting shared custody of the baby. "Look," Rob said, practically begging, "you and I both know she lied about you. But if she keeps talking to people, spreading more lies, it's going to ruin everything. I don't know what Emily's telling her, but Madison's convinced her mom hates her, and now she's making stuff up to get attention. What do you want me to do, Rob?" I asked, already feeling the weight of the problem pressing on me. "You've got to talk to her. Talk to both of them. You've got to calm them down before this whole thing spirals even further out of control. If Madison keeps making accusations, Emily's going to go off the deep end, and you're going to lose any chance of winning custody." I didn't want to get involved again. After everything Madison had already done to destroy my life, I wanted to stay far away. But Rob was right. Madison's behavior wasn't just a personal problem anymore. It was a threat. If she dragged Emily down with her, I would lose everything I was fighting for. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion creep into my bones. "Fine, I'll talk to them, but I'm not promising anything." A few days later, I met with Emily. She looked worn down, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her once vibrant, fiery demeanor had been replaced by a hollow shell of the woman I used to know. It was hard to look at her like this, pregnant, vulnerable, emotionally wrecked. As we sat across from each other, I didn't even know where to begin. Should I address the custody battle first? Or the fact that Madison's actions were pulling everything apart? Emily spoke first, her voice quiet and broken. "Jack, I don't know how to fix this." Her words hung in the air, full of desperation. She wasn't just talking about the legal battle or our broken marriage. She was talking about her life, the mess she had created, and the family that was crumbling around her. "I never wanted it to get this bad," she continued, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't know Madison would lie like that. I thought I was protecting her." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Emily, I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here because we need to talk about what's happening now. Madison is spiraling. Rob is losing control, and she's making things worse for everyone. If this keeps up, the court is going to see both of you as unstable." Emily wiped at her tears with shaky hands. I know, but what am I supposed to do? She's my daughter, Jack. She hates me now. She thinks I'm choosing you over her." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know what you're supposed to do, Emily, but I do know that if you don't get a handle on this, we're both going to lose. You'll lose Madison, and I'll lose any chance of being a father to this baby." Her tears turned into sobs as she buried her face in her hands. I can't fix this. I don't know how." I felt a pang of sympathy, despite everything. Emily was trapped in her own emotional turmoil, caught between the guilt of not believing me and the guilt of losing her daughter. I wanted to help, but I also knew there wasn't much I could do. "We're both trapped," I said softly. "Madison is doing everything she can to tear us apart, and it's working. We need to stop her before it's too late." Emily looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot and full of fear. How? How do we stop her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we can't keep letting this spiral out of control. You need to talk to her. Set boundaries. Get her the help she needs. Because if this goes on any longer, there won't be anything left to salvage." Emily nodded weakly, but I could tell she wasn't sure if she had the strength to do it. Still, we had no other choice. Later that week, Emily finally confronted Madison. I wasn't there for the conversation, but from what Rob told me, it didn't go well. Madison lashed out, accusing Emily of abandoning her, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in their lives. It was like all of Madison's pain and anger had built up to a boiling point, and when it finally spilled over, it took everyone down with it. Madison's lies weren't just about me anymore. She started telling people that Emily hated her, that she didn't care about her own daughter. It was a manipulative cry for help, a desperate attempt to get her mother's attention. But instead of fixing anything, it only made things worse. Emily's guilt was eating her alive. She wanted to be there for Madison, but the more Madison pushed, the more Emily withdrew. It was a vicious cycle, and none of us knew how to break it. For me, the realization was setting in. This wasn't just about the custody battle. It was about a family that had been torn apart, and no matter what happened in court, there was no way to repair the damage. The family that once was would never be the same again. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from my lawyer, Claire. She sounded more serious than usual, and I could tell right away that something was wrong. "Jack, we need to talk," she said. "Emily's legal team just filed new papers. They're trying to use Madison's mental state as evidence that you're unfit to share custody of the baby." My stomach dropped. "What? How can they do that?" Claire sighed. "They're claiming that Madison's trauma, caused by the accusations, makes the environment unsafe for both her and the baby. They're painting you as the cause of all the dysfunction in the family, Jack." I felt the rage boiling up inside me. Emily was so desperate to win this custody battle that she was willing to throw everything at me, including Madison's mental health. It was low, even for her. "Can we fight it?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "We can," Claire replied, "but it's going to get messy. They're going to pull out every piece of dirt they can find on you, and they're going to use Madison's behavior as proof that you're a danger to the baby." The walls felt like they were closing in. I had known this custody battle would be tough, but I hadn't expected it to get this dirty. Emily was playing hardball, and now I had to decide how far I was willing to go to protect my rights as a father. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a fight for my future, for my children's future. I had to dig in my heels and prepare for the war that was coming. The courtroom had always been a place I feared, but now it became my battlefield. Emily's legal team wasn't pulling any punches. Every day brought new accusations, new claims about my fitness as a parent. They used Madison's emotional state as their weapon, framing me as the cause of all the dysfunction in the family. It didn't matter that Madison had lied. It didn't matter that her accusations had already been debunked. To the court, what mattered was that she was suffering, and Emily was using that to her full advantage. My lawyer, Claire, was relentless. She knew how to handle these kinds of cases, but even she warned me that it was going to be a brutal fight. "They're going to dig deep, Jack," she told me. "They'll use everything against you. Your past, your relationship with Emily, and Madison's lies. They'll try to make you look like the villain." And that's exactly what they did. During one of the hearings, Emily's lawyer brought up Madison's deteriorating mental health, painting a picture of a young girl traumatized by what had happened between me and her mother. "This child is clearly suffering," her lawyer argued, voice dripping with calculated concern. "She has been caught in the crossfire of a man who abandoned her and caused irreparable damage to her relationship with her mother. This is not the environment we want to bring a newborn into." I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, every word cutting deeper than the last. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to shout out the truth that I hadn't abandoned anyone. But that wasn't how court worked. The truth was buried beneath layers of legal strategy, emotional manipulation, and outright lies. When it was our turn to respond, Claire was sharp, methodical. She laid out the facts clearly. Madison had lied, and Emily's decision to believe her without question had torn our family apart. She reminded the court that I had never harmed Madison, nor had I done anything to justify being cut out of my unborn child's life. But the damage had already been done. The judge's face remained unreadable as we made our case, and I couldn't help but feel like we were losing. While Emily's team focused on painting me as the villain, Claire wasn't afraid to fight back. She started to shift the focus onto Emily's mental health. In one of the hearings, she presented evidence of Emily's erratic behavior. Her desperate text messages, her emotional breakdowns, her willingness to give up custody of her children just to keep me in her life. Claire argued that Emily wasn't in a stable place to raise a newborn. "She's been emotionally volatile, Your Honor," Claire stated firmly. Her messages to my client show a woman who is mentally unraveling under the pressure. Jack Stevens is not the only one fighting for stability here. He is fighting to protect his unborn child from a chaotic environment. As Claire spoke, I could see the tension rising in Emily. She looked fragile, her hands shaking as she stared down at the table. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Emily had brought this on herself, but that didn't make it any easier to watch. She had spiraled so far out of control, so deep into her desperation, that she was willing to destroy everything we had built just to come out on top. And now, the court was beginning to question whether she was stable enough to handle another child. The more we revealed about her instability, the more Emily's mask began to crack. She couldn't hide the anxiety, the emotional roller coaster she had been on since the accusations began. I knew she wasn't a bad person, but she was lost, too lost to raise a newborn on her own. Despite the ugliness of the court battle, there was a small glimmer of hope. The judge ordered both Emily and me to undergo psychological evaluations. It was a way for the court to assess who was the more stable parent who could provide a better environment for the baby. At first, I was terrified. What if they found something in my past, something I wasn't even aware of, that could be used against me? But Claire reassured me. "Jack, you've done nothing wrong. This evaluation is a good thing. It will show the court that you're the stable, rational parent here. Emily's unraveling. This is our chance to prove that you're the one who can provide the best environment for your child." The psychological evaluation was intense. I spent hours answering questions about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my previous marriage, and my time with Emily. I laid everything bare. My fears, my hopes, my regrets. It was exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. When the results came back, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The evaluation confirmed what I had been trying to prove all along. I was stable, emotionally and mentally. The evaluator noted that I had demonstrated a consistent commitment to the well-being of my children, and that I was capable of providing a nurturing and safe environment for a newborn. Emily's evaluation, on the other hand, painted a very different picture. It highlighted her emotional instability, her erratic behavior during the pregnancy, and her strained relationship with Madison. The report didn't outright declare her unfit, but it raised enough red flags to give us an advantage. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Emily dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. One night, after a particularly tense day in court, she called me. I hesitated before answering, not wanting to get into another heated argument. But something in her voice stopped me. She sounded different, calm, but in a way that sent a chill down my spine. "Jack," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know." "What is it, Emily?" I asked, already bracing myself for the worst. "I'm not sure if the baby is yours." Her words hit me like a freight train. My mind went blank for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. "What?" I finally managed to choke out. "What are you talking about?" Emily's voice trembled. "Before we separated, things were bad between us. I made some mistakes. I'm not proud of it, but I was seeing someone else." I couldn't breathe. The world around me seemed to tilt. The baby, this baby I had been fighting so hard for, might not even be mine. "I didn't know what to do," Emily continued, her voice thick with guilt. "I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid. I thought maybe if I kept it a secret, it would go away. But now, I don't know what to do." Anger, disbelief, betrayal, it all flooded through me at once. "Are you telling me that I've been fighting this entire time for a child that might not even be mine?" My voice shook with barely contained rage. "I don't know," Emily sobbed. "I don't know, Jack. I'm so sorry." I hung up the phone, unable to listen to her apologies. My entire world had been flipped upside down. Everything I had been fighting for, every sleepless night, every court appearance, it was all for nothing. Or was it? Suddenly, the stakes were even higher. If the baby wasn't mine, I was ready to walk away, to leave this entire mess behind. But if it was mine, I had to know for sure. I had to get a paternity test, and I had to prepare myself for whatever the result might be. The revelation of Emily's affair changed everything. I contacted Claire immediately, telling her about the conversation. She didn't seem surprised. "This complicates things," she said, "but it also gives us leverage. We'll demand a paternity test, and if the baby isn't yours, then you'll have grounds to walk away from the case." But I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. I needed to know the truth. I needed to know if the baby I had been fighting for was mine. The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me in a constant state of anxiety. The paternity test was scheduled for the following week, but the days leading up to it felt like an eternity. My entire future hung in the balance. If the baby wasn't mine, I would be free from this nightmare. But if it was, then the fight wasn't over. And deep down, I knew that no matter what the result, the damage had already been done. The family I had once known was gone, torn apart by lies, betrayal, and a war that had left no one unscathed. The day of the paternity test finally arrived, and the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in the sterile clinic, waiting for the test that would determine the course of my future. Would the baby be mine, or would I finally have an out from this nightmare? Emily was already there when I arrived, looking like a shadow of her former self. Her once confident posture was replaced with slumped shoulders and vacant eyes. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not after what she'd done. Not after the months of lies, manipulation, and the destruction of my life. And now this. Now, the possibility that the baby I had been fighting for wasn't even mine. We sat in silence, waiting for our names to be called. The tension between us was palpable. It felt like years passed before the nurse finally led us into the small room where our DNA samples would be collected. The entire process was over in minutes, but the waiting felt like a lifetime. The results wouldn't be available for another week, and that week stretched out into what felt like an eternity. Every day was a struggle, torn between hope and dread. If the baby was mine, I knew I'd have to continue the fight. But if it wasn't, I could walk away. I could leave Emily, Madison, and all the chaos behind and finally find peace with Sophia. It was the most conflicting week of my life, torn between wanting to be a father again and hoping for the nightmare to end. During that week of waiting, Emily spiraled further into her breakdown. The emotional toll of everything, the lies, the court battle, and the uncertainty of the baby's paternity, was tearing her apart. She called me nearly every day, but I ignored most of her calls. I didn't have the strength to deal with her guilt or her endless apologies. But one night, she called, and something in her voice told me to answer. I could hear the desperation, the panic, the fear. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, my heart racing. "I'm not okay," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm not okay, Jack. I'm losing everything. I've lost you. I've lost Madison, and now I might lose this baby. I don't know how to keep going." I swallowed hard, torn between anger and sympathy. Emily had done this to herself, but hearing her like this, so broken, made it hard to hold on to my resentment. "You need help, Emily," I said quietly. "You can't keep doing this alone." "I don't want to be alone," she sobbed. "I just want things to go back to the way they were. I want my family back." "We can't go back," I told her, my voice firm but not unkind. "Too much has happened." She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her shaky breathing on the other end of the line. "I don't know if I can make it through this," she whispered. I gripped the phone tightly, feeling the weight of her words. I wasn't in love with her anymore. How could I be after everything she had done? But the thought of her falling apart completely, of her hurting herself, I couldn't bear that. "You need to talk to someone," I said softly. "Get help. For yourself, for the baby." "I don't know how to fix this," she repeated, her voice barely audible. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't fix her. I couldn't fix what was broken between us. All I could do was wait for the paternity test and hope that whatever the result, it would bring some kind of resolution. A week later, the results arrived. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This piece of paper would decide everything. Whether I would continue the fight or whether I could walk away. The words blurred before my eyes as I scanned the page, my heart pounding in my ears. And then there it was. 99.9% probability. The baby was mine. The room spun for a moment as the reality sank in. The baby was mine. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. I sat down, my legs weak, trying to process the flood of emotions rushing through me. Relief that the child was mine. Dread at the thought of the custody battle that still loomed ahead. And somewhere, deep down, a flicker of hope. Despite everything, this child was my chance to start over. My chance to build a new life, even if it wasn't the one I had envisioned. But first, I had to finish the battle with Emily. Just as I was preparing for the next round in court, something unexpected happened. Madison reached out to me. She sent me a message, short, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. "Can we talk?" I stared at my phone, unsure of what to do. Madison hadn't spoken to me since the day she had accused me of something so vile, something that had torn my world apart. And now, out of nowhere, she wanted to talk? I agreed to meet her, unsure of what to expect. When I arrived at the small cafe where we agreed to meet, I spotted her sitting at a table, looking nervous and out of place. She was just a kid. Lost, scared, and clearly unsure of what she was doing. I sat down across from her, the silence between us thick with tension. "Why did you want to meet?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart racing. Madison hesitated, her eyes darting around the room before she finally looked at me. I lied," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I had known it was a lie. I had known all along, but hearing her admit it was like reopening a wound I thought had started to heal. "Why?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice calm. She wiped at her eyes, clearly fighting back tears. "I didn't want you to take my mom away from me. I was scared. I thought if I made you leave, things would go back to how they were before." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, it had been fear. Fear of losing her mother. Fear of change. Fear that I had become the enemy in her mind, the one who had taken her mother's attention and love away from her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." I sat there, stunned, not knowing what to say. Madison had lied, and her lie had nearly destroyed me. But sitting across from her now, seeing her pain, her regret. I couldn't bring myself to be angry. I just wanted things to go back to normal, she said, her voice breaking. There's no going back, I said quietly, the weight of the truth settling in. Too much has happened. Madison nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I know. I didn't mean for any of this. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. What's done is done. But I appreciate that you told me the truth. We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of the confession hanging heavy between us. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. Things would never be the same. After Madison's confession, something inside me shifted. The anger, the resentment. It didn't vanish, but it dulled. I knew now that I wasn't the villain in this story. I had been caught in the crossfire of a broken family, a family torn apart by fear, lies, and desperation. But now, I had clarity. I knew what I had to do. The baby was mine, and I was going to fight for him or her with everything I had. The custody battle wasn't over, but I was ready. Emily's mental state was crumbling. Madison's lies were out in the open, and I had the truth on my side. I was going to win this fight, not just for myself, but for my child. And no matter what happened next, I was ready to face it head-on. With the truth about Madison's lie out in the open, and the paternity test confirming that the baby was mine, I felt more ready than ever to face what was ahead. The legal battle wasn't over yet, but I had new clarity, a sense of purpose that pushed me forward. I wasn't just fighting for custody anymore. I was fighting for my future, for my child, and for the peace I had been desperately seeking. When I walked into the courtroom for what would be the final custody hearing, the air was thick with tension. Emily sat at the opposite end of the room, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked fragile, like she was barely holding on, and part of me wondered if she would make it through this. But I couldn't let that sway me. I had seen what Emily was capable of, the lengths she would go to in order to manipulate the situation. This wasn't about pity. It was about doing what was right for my child. The judge entered, and the room fell into a heavy silence. It all came down to this. Emily's lawyer, as always, wasted no time. He reiterated their claims that Emily, despite her emotional struggles, was still the best choice for custody. He argued that she had always been a devoted mother and that her relationship with Madison, strained as it was proof of the lengths she would go to protect her children. Ms. Stevens has been through an incredibly difficult period, her lawyer said, his voice measured and calm. But she remains a loving, responsible mother who deserves the chance to raise her child. Her temporary emotional instability is not a reflection of her overall ability to parent, and it should not be held against her. I sat there, feeling the familiar knot of dread tighten in my chest. Emily's lawyer was good. He knew how to twist the narrative just enough to make her seem like the victim of a situation that had spiraled out of her control. But then it was Claire's turn, and I knew we were ready. She stood confidently, her voice firm and unwavering. Your Honor, while we respect the difficult situation Ms. Stevens has faced, we must also consider the facts. Mr. Stevens has demonstrated emotional stability and a commitment to his child's well-being. The psychological evaluations clearly show that he is the more stable parent, capable of providing a safe, nurturing environment for the baby. She paused, letting her words sink in. Furthermore, she continued, the recent revelation that Madison Stevens fabricated the original accusations against Mr. Stevens shows that this family has been torn apart by mistrust and emotional manipulation. Mr. Stevens has been a victim of these false claims, and it would be unjust to deny him the right to be a father to his child based on lies. I felt the weight lift slightly from my shoulders as Claire laid out the facts with precision. She wasn't just defending me, she was fighting for the truth. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable, as both sides presented their final arguments. When it was over, he called for a recess, and I could feel the tension rise as we waited for the final decision. The waiting was agonizing. I sat outside the courtroom, pacing back and forth, my mind racing with every possible outcome. Would the judge see through Emily's facade? Would he give me custody? Or would I lose everything I had fought for? But as the minutes ticked by, something unexpected happened. Emily, who had been sitting silently in a corner, suddenly broke down. I watched as she started sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking as she buried her face in her palms. Her lawyer rushed to her side, trying to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. "I can't do this anymore," she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "I can't." The entire hallway fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. I felt my heart clench in my chest. Emily was unraveling right in front of us, and for the first time, I saw just how deeply the situation had affected her. Her lawyer led her away, and I heard him quietly say something about needing a moment. I stood there, frozen, unsure of how to react. Part of me felt guilty for watching her fall apart, but another part of me knew this was the natural consequence of everything she had done. The woman I had once loved was now a shell of herself, broken by her own actions. It was tragic, yes, but it didn't change what I had to do. When the judge finally returned to the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. We all took our seats, waiting for the decision that would change everything. The judge's voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of finality. "I have carefully considered the evidence presented by both parties," he began. "This has been a difficult case, one marked by emotional distress and complicated family dynamics. However, the court's primary concern is the best interest of the child." He paused, and my heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. Based on the psychological evaluations, the testimony of both parties, and the recent revelation regarding Madison's false accusations, I have determined that Mr. Stevens is the more stable parent at this time. I could barely breathe. Therefore, I am granting Mr. Stevens primary custody of the child. Ms. Stevens will retain visitation rights, but custody will remain with Mr. Stevens until such time as the court deems it appropriate to review the case. The words washed over me like a wave of relief. I had one. I had fought for my child, and I had one. I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, and for the first time in months, I could finally breathe again. Emily sat across the room, her face pale and tear-streaked. I didn't feel victorious. There was no joy in this moment, only a deep sense of relief that it was finally over. After the court hearing, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a strange emptiness. I had won the custody battle, but it hadn't come without a cost. Emily was a wreck, Madison was still struggling, and the family we had tried to build was shattered beyond repair. But now, I had to focus on the future. I had a baby on the way, a child who would need me, a child I would protect with everything I had. I had Sophia to think about as well, and I promised myself that no matter what, I would be the best father I could be to both of them. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. I moved into a new home, one where I could raise the baby in peace, away from the chaos that had consumed my life for so long. I focused on building a stable environment, one where both my children could grow up feeling safe and loved. A few weeks after the court ruling, I received one final message from Emily. "Jack, I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me. Take care of our child. I won't get in the way anymore." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Emily had finally accepted defeat, and with that, I felt the last pieces of the past fall away. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The day my baby was born was a mix of emotions: joy, fear, and hope. Holding my child in my arms for the first time, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what I had fought for. This was what mattered. As I looked down at my newborn, I knew that the past was behind me. The lies, the betrayal, the court battles, they were all part of a chapter that had finally closed. I was moving forward. For myself, for Sophia, and for my new child. The fight was over, and now, it was time to begin again.